lead the vanguard forward into the unknown and transform the world. So foolish as it is, it's absolutely necessary.
Foolish because risky?
Yes, because risky, yes. I mean, it's foolish in the same way that a high risk, high return bet is foolish. There's a high probability that you'll lose. And so if you're a conservative person, you're very concerned about hedging your bets. You don't want to lose. Being creative is a very bad game to play, but you won't play it anyways because you're conservative, so it isn't going to matter.
So you are an open late teen, and you have conservative parents, and you say, Mom, Dad, I think I've decided that I'm going to be an artist.
Oh yeah, and they think, what's wrong with that kid?
That's a complicated conversation, isn't it?
Yes, yes. It's like discussing color with someone who's colorblind. And I mean that. And it's actually a perverse thing about conservatives in some sense, because the data on the economic utility of artists is really, really strong. I mean, artists and entrepreneurs are the same people. And of course, entrepreneurs are the people who provide all of the vision for the entire capitalist system. They're absolutely necessary. But conservatives tend to be so blind to art that they can't even see that the artists are the people who drive the economy forward.
But you make them sound so bad.
No, look, I mean, so here's another way of thinking about it. Is liberals,
are we talking about political conservatives and political liberals?
Yes, we're also talking about personality traits determine voting patterns to a great degree. So people vote their temperaments. And this is something that's really useful to understand when you're engaged in a political discussion, is that the person across the table from you who holds viewpoints other than yours is not doing it because they're stupid or ill-informed. They're doing it because they are not the same sort of person you are. And the funny thing about creative people versus conservative people, say, or liberal people versus conservative people, is that liberals start companies and conservatives run them. So you do seriously mean that.
I'm glad to know you need conservatives.
Yeah.
I was getting a little bit worried.
They're managers, like conscientious people make good managers and good administrators. And they tend to do better in school too, because diligence and dutifulness is an excellent predictor of academic performance. So if you want something that's already been invented, implemented, and then turned into a machine, you don't get someone creative to do that. They're off to do the next thing. They're not even interested in that. You'll bore them to death. So.
Wow. So let's say you're an employer and you need some creative people.
Yep.
Is there a psychometric test to find out if someone's actually creative and they're going to be useful?
Well, IQ tests work. I mean, not everyone with a high IQ is creative. Lots of lawyers have high IQs and they tend not to be creative at all. Well, you think about why that is, eh? Because lawyers are bound by precedent and rules, and so that isn't the same as being creative. And you want a creative accountant? No, not really. not unless you're looking for a jail sentence. So
they don't like that word at all.
No, yeah, that's right. My creative accountant, wink, right. So I mean, I psychometrically tested the 100 most creative lawyers in Canada as a project about 15 years ago with a magazine called L'Expert, which was a high prestige magazine among lawyers. And we had lawyers from across the country be nominated by their firms for creativity. And so we got some really, these were outstanding lawyers. And we tested them psychometrically, very, very high in intelligence, but not creative at all. The first trait was conscientious, dutiful, hardworking, diligent, industrious, orderly. Because you're working 70 hours a week, and you better bloody well work if you're in a position like that too. So it's nose to the grindstone stuff. Very low in neuroticism because it's very stressful. So they didn't experience much negative emotion. Very disagreeable people. Well, they're litigators, eh? And so they want to win. They're not compassionate and they're not polite. And only after that were they open. So they weren't creative at all, but they were extraordinarily intelligent. So,
do employers look for creative people?
No, not generally. Well, it's a real conundrum. So one of the things that's happening right now is that in most businesses, the non-creative people are increasingly being replaced by machines, right? Because anything that's creative can't really be turned into an algorithm that you can run as a machine, but anything that isn't creative can be. And so there's increasing demand in corporations for creative people, but the problem with being creative is that you're useless at the bottom of the dominance hierarchy. Because at the bottom of the dominance hierarchy, so a power hierarchy, you should do what you're told to do. You're not there to think outside the box. You're there to learn what you're supposed to do and implement it. And creative people are that isn't what they do. Now, what happens, though, to companies is that because they filter all the creative people out at the bottom, and then people start to rise up to the top, you really need creative people at the top because they are the entrepreneurial types, and they're the ones, for example, in law firms, even though lawyers aren't very creative, the more entrepreneurial ones are the ones that bring in all the business. There's like great lawyers who can implement, who can write well and communicate well. They're not a dime a dozen, but they're relatively common. But the ones who are entrepreneurial, who can go out there and drum up new business, man, those people are super, hyper valuable, and they're very rare. But it's also very difficult to nurse them within any system because systems do not nurture creativity. They're the antithesis of creativity. Because the artist is always the person who stands outside the structure. And so, or maybe builds his or her own structure, you know, which is also why it's hard to evaluate creative people. You can't, really, because if they're operating within the confines of a system that has an evaluative structure, they're not creative. So they're a real pain to try to manage and to organize. But you can select them. You select people who are high in intelligence and high in openness. We've done that in California. So I work with this company called the Founder Institute. It's quite a cool company. It's run by this guy named Hideo Resi, and he has now started schools to foster entrepreneurship in 135 different cities. And so we're testing in 8 languages, and we can reliably select people who will have a functioning business within a year. You select them for high openness and high intelligence, roughly speaking. So it's certainly something you can do. But then you have to figure out what you're going to do with those people, because telling them what to do isn't going to work, and putting them in a box is completely counterproductive. So they're very annoying, even though they're hyper necessary.
We work with living artists, and I spent my whole career working with living artists. I worked with one dead artist once, and I will never do that again. It's not for the faint of heart. It's not for everyone to manage creatives.
It's also not for